Hi again, my name is Kortsch from the Monetary Trust Initiative. I want to do something slightly different today. I want to combine politics with economics and look at where we are in this presidential race and why I think some of the things that we're seeing happening are actually happening. I'm calling this The Big Short. Yeah, it's a takeoff on the movie, obviously. From the Great Recession to the Great Revolt. I'm not a political pundit. I'm not advocating for any candidate. I'm not even sure I'll mention any of them. This is a statement of what I would call we the people. Where are we at? What's happening? I think the political movement that we're happening among the many candidates demonstrates a lack of trust and anger, not a lack of anger, but anger and therefore a lack of trust with our overall system. Over half the electorate today would vote for a combination of Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, and Ted Cruz. And they're all anti-establishment candidates. Their deliberate voice is, we're not a part of Washington. We're not a part of the economic system that has created this. We're not a part of the banking system. We're not. Instead of we are, it's we're not. It's largely a negative message. Not totally, but largely. Back to the anger. It isn't just anger. I recognize that. This lack of trust, it's unfocused. We ourselves, the people, we ourselves don't understand why we feel like this. But it's deep down in our gut, we sense a powerlessness. We want to throw out the rulers. We want to throw out the elite. Don't really understand why. We're just fed up with whatever. All right. Well, at this presidential election, or obviously congressional too, we feel that we can finally throw them out. And so that's why we've got these weird dynamics. And I'm not saying the next president is not going to be part of the previous or prior or current elite. That's not my point. My point is the mass movement that has occurred. So why am I calling it The Big Short? Kind of funny, because I'm shorting the establishment. All right, let's look at the economic side of it, because I believe that's 80% of the reasons that I just gave you. It's been 8 years since the 2007-2008 recession. It started in the last few months of 2007, but really hit in 2008. So what are the issues? We have been told for the last 8 years, quote, we have it all under control. Don't worry about it. All right? Well, let's look at what it is that we should not have worried about. What are the results of the Great Recession? Here's a quick overview. There's no way I'm going to go into a whole bunch of details. We just don't have the time for it. Well, let's start with the home market, because that's really where things happened with mortgages. In the last 8 years, 7 million Americans have lost their homes. Are you one of them? Am I one of them? This is not a good thing. How about unemployment? I recently had lunch with one of the presidents of the Federal Reserve Bank, and the dual mandate of the Fed is price stability and maximum employment. And I'm having lunch with him, and he says to me, he says, well, I believe we have fulfilled at least one of these, maximum employment. Well, you could have picked my jaw off the table. I'm going, really? Pardon my voice. I was stunned. I really was. See, because that's U3 versus U6. Oh, well, what does that mean? Well, U3 is full-time work, okay? And if you don't have a full-time job, that means in the last 4 weeks, you have actively looked for work. It does not include part-time workers. It does not include discouraged workers in the unemployment side. It does not include workers who just happen to have gone on holidays for the last 4 weeks. It doesn't include people who have multiple jobs desperately trying to make ends meet. So I said to this president of the Federal Reserve, and I said, excuse me, U3 is the world that we lived in 20 years ago. We just don't live in that world anymore. We don't live in the world where somebody has a full-time job with the same company for a long period of time, and oh my goodness, now they're unemployed and they're looking for a job. No, we are scrambling. Okay, well, what's the difference in the numbers? The U3 number, that's what you see publicized all the time. It's at 5% right now. We have a 5% unemployment. That's wonderful. That's stable. But you see, The real number is the U6 number, which today is about 10%. I've got a chart here from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So that's the government, the BLS, okay? It shows labor participation of 25 to 50-year-olds since 2007 to today. And you notice there's a steady drop down, all right? So fewer and fewer people of that 25 to 54-year age group are actually participating in labor. And you know the argument I get? I can't believe this. People say to me, well, you know, society is getting older. The average age is getting older, so therefore no wonder participation rate is going down. And I look at them and I say, excuse me, are you telling me that today's 54-year-olds are older than the 54-year-olds that were 54-year-old 20 years ago? What is it about this statistic that you don't get? Don't tell me they've become older. They're the same age. Every year, the 54-year-olds are 54. The next year, they're 55. They're not counted anymore. So don't tell me it's because we've aged as a society, so that therefore the participation rate is slower. Anyway, let's look at something else. And that's the whole thing of quantitative easing and the effects and an argument that you hear so much about these days, which is wealth inequality. Why is it that over the last few years, we have seen a significant increase in wealth inequality? The biggest reason is because of quantitative easing. You see, most people really don't understand how we do that. So what you read, even in financial magazines and articles and books, is the Federal Reserve Bank is, quote, printing money, because they don't have a printing press. I mean, we know that. It's just electronic money. But they actually aren't in what you and I think of as printing money. That's not really the case. What happens is the Fed prints money for itself, uses that on the secondary market, which is large primary dealers, large financial institutions, mostly big banks, and they purchase government treasuries and agency debt, GSEs, we don't have to talk about that, from these primary dealers, and the money is moved into an account at the Federal Reserve Bank for those primary dealers. We call those reserves. So the reserves in the Federal Reserve have gone up to about $4 trillion today. What has that done? All it's done is lowered the interest rate on that paper and forced you and me to go into riskier assets, and in the process create a huge bubble in assets. So the biggest reason as to why the wealthy have become wealthier is not because they're, quote, earning more money. It's not an income effect primarily. It's a wealth effect. Look at the little chart I'm showing you here. So this is from 2013. Slightly outdated, but it's the most recent one I could find. So the top 3% now own 54% of all American assets. Okay? That was not like that before. So the wealth, there is a greater wealth effect. But it was caused by policy. This is not because all of a sudden these people are so smart and so therefore they made a whole lot more money. No, our very policy killed savers, especially retired people, especially people on what we call fixed income, because the interest rates have been dropped down to zero. In the process, the assets have gone through the roof. Okay, we call it ZIRP, Z-I-R-P. A zero interest rate policy, which just kills savers. So if you're trying to have a set income out of a fixed income portfolio, your return rate is essentially zero. And especially for savers, this is just devastating. All right? Let's look at debt. These are all, I'm just remembering, these are all things that have come out of the Great Recession. All right? Federal debt since the Great Recession has more than doubled. That's in only 8 years. We've gone from 8.9 trillion in 2007 to today about 19.2 trillion. Oh my goodness. And by the way, the aggregated US debt, so that's federal government, state government, commercial, and private, today is at about 350%. All right? This is way out of whack with where we're at as an economy. We are in greater debt today than we were before the Great Recession, and the Great Recession was caused by an overhang of debt. Ladies and gentlemen, this doesn't look good. Student debt. Today, as I'm talking, there are 7 million student loans that are in default. Where is this going? All right, let's stop with that wind-up of bad effects. Here's where we get angry. Nobody's gone to jail. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, when I started working on some of the economic policies that I'm talking about on these videos. And I said to people, you know, maybe they're not listening now, but you wait until some of the people that have caused these problems go to jail. And they'll start listening, saying, oh my goodness, there are personal ramifications to me making wrong decisions. Well, we have bank after bank that has pled guilty, paid billions and billions in fines, but the individuals who did it were not hit. It's only the shareholders. This is not the kind of world that we want. All right, let's briefly look at what caused the Great Recession. It was obviously a systemic failure. We have an unstable and unsustainable financial system. All right? One of the common things that you see talked about is, well, it was caused by regulation. And there's two views. There's too much regulation or too little regulation. I'm going to tell you in just a minute it was the wrong kind of regulation. Let's look at those two for just a minute. This Great Recession was caused by too much regulation. Well, usually what's quoted is the Community Reinvestment Act, because it forced banks to make bad loans for the sake of social policy. Let me tell you, we got social policy, all right. At the time at which the mortgage crash occurred, 27 million mortgages, about 50% of all mortgages, were subprime and Alt-A for the sake of social policy. And that social policy resulted in 7 million of those people losing their homes. Good social policy, right? No, I don't think so. The other side says, well, no, we had too little regulation. Bank investments, funding, reserve, these were all misaligned, okay? And the whole point was to create more profit for the banks. That's why the banks didn't want to have this extra regulation. Well, that worked too, didn't it? whole bunch of them went bankrupt, and the really big ones we had to bail out. So my answer is, I don't think it was too much regulation primarily or too little regulation primarily, although we can argue about those. I think it's the wrong kind of regulation. Let me respond. Let me explain. Let me try to help you through some of this. All right, what are our responses? As we look at all this and feel this internally, what are our responses? Well, the elite says, you know, the same people that caused the problem, now they're going to solve it. Yes, we have the answers. And you're going in the back of your mind, you're going, really? You guys are the ones who caused the problem? Now you're in charge of fixing the problem? Do I think there's something wrong about this? Here's a direct quote from The Economist on the Dodd-Frank Act, okay, which creates the too big to fail. And it says, the Dodd-Frank Act, the flaws in this confused, bloated law passed in the aftermath of America's financial crisis become ever more apparent. Because we create bail-ins, you know, that's where those of us who are depositors, especially corporations who have more than $250,000, they now end up having to pay for a bank's crash. Okay? The Dodd-Frank Act does not solve the problems that were created. Well, let's quote the elite. Let's look at the street. So what was the response on the street? Well, we had Occupy Wall Street. Again, anger, people with signs, people complaining, but it was unfocused because they did not understand what the underlying factors actually were. And so therefore there was no penetration into the system for change. People ask them, well, what do you want? They go, we are angry. Well, I know, but what do you want changed? We don't know. And the third group I just want to briefly talk about as far as response is Congress. The response in Congress, I hate to say it, is paralysis. So why are we angry? Here's 4 reasons as to why I think we are angry. Number 1, there's a loss of confidence in our public institutions, especially the banks. Number 2, because they, whoever they are, they have told us it's all under control. There, dear. It's all right. Pat, pat on the shoulder. It's all okay. Don't you worry your little head about it. We've got this all worked out. Okay? And number 3, as I've already said, because they who caused the problems are now in charge of fixing it. And number 4, deep inside of ourselves, we are sure that the root causes are actually not being addressed. And ladies and gentlemen, that is true. They're not being addressed. So what are the root causes? I want to give you 2 pictures. Sometimes pictures tell 1,000 words. Here's a little cartoon that says, we have a lot of simple answers, but often they're very wrong, and most people go down that road. And then we have complex answers, but they're the right answers. But they're difficult to understand. By the way, I got that from a friend of mine. I don't know where he got it from, but I thought it amply demonstrated what so often happens. The second image I want to use is the game Jenga. If you don't know the game, let me just briefly explain, because I believe from an economic perspective, this is what we've been doing. Jenga concerns is a bunch of little blocks, about this long, and they're rectangular. And what you do is you build a tower. And the game is that as you go from player to player around, you have to pick one of the blocks out and put it on top. And whoever the last player was, as the tower ultimately collapses, because it gets more and more unstable, that's the loser. That's the loser of the game. All right? How are we economically like Jenga? Well, I think 100 years ago with the Federal Reserve Bank, we created a tower. There are many pieces to this, and there's a slow accumulation of instability. This isn't something that happens overnight. So we take different pieces and readjust our economic tower, and in the process, increase the amount of instability. We were massively unstable in 2007, 2008, and one of the pieces that we picked up, the tower was leaning this way, and we put it on the other side, and we were able to temporarily restabilize the tower. If you've played the game, you know that's possible. I've done it, okay? Where you say, I don't want to be the loser. I want to make sure the tower doesn't fall while it's my it's my turn. And so you very carefully restabilize the tower, but it's only temporary. From this, we get the word and the book called Tipping Point. If you've read it, it's a good book, by the way. Tipping point is the point at which a series of small changes or incidents become significant enough to cause a larger and more important change. That is demonstrated by the game Jenga. That is the tipping point that we are afraid of. All right? Let's look at what are the fundamental issues. Because I believe it's principles. Instead of taking these little pieces and rejiggering the tower, we need to look at the underlying principles. And the biggest principle, I believe, is money. Because you see, we think that money represents value, and it should represent value. You pull out a dollar bill, don't you think it has value? I do. But you see, the problem is that our money actually represents debt, because it's only created through debt. And I've gone through that before in other videos. I don't want to repeat all that here. I want to suggest you go to I'll give you a couple of websites at the end, or here on YouTube, go to the earlier videos and have a look at those, where I give the understanding and explain how it's the private banking system that actually creates our money. It is not the Federal Reserve Bank. They create reserves and they attempt to create stability. And I'm having some difficulties doing that, obviously. All right? We've done better than a bunch of other countries. I'm not going to argue with you on that. And by the way, I am not going to tell you the people that are in the Fed are bad people. I know some of them. They are people that are desperately trying to do the best that they can. I really believe that. I have absolutely no question about that. But I believe the tools, the tool chest that they have is a poor tool chest. And that's all that they're allowed to work with. All right? Have a look at those earlier videos and see what I'm saying as to how money is only created through debt. If we had no debt, we would have no money. You're going, whoa, you're really crazy now. The result is this ever increasing debt as our money supply has to increase. Okay? By the way, even if we were to live within our means, in aggregate, we would still have an ever-increasing amount of debt. It's kind of hard to understand, so go back to the earlier stuff. By the way, this also shows the impossibility of paying out the interest without default. Our system mandates default because otherwise it is impossible within the aggregate. We're all talking about the aggregate here, not what you and I individually do, okay? Within the aggregate, it would be impossible to do that. This creates a mentality of scarcity, okay? There's never enough. Scarcity leads to impotence, weakness. We cannot do what we want. Don't you feel that politically, where we have so many good intentions and we're not able to fulfill them? It comes out of the very system that we have created, all right? So let's talk about the diagnosis. Back to the Jenga tower. No, take this piece. No, this piece is out of whack. No, we need to change this on the interest rates. No, the way we count this, it's the wrong diagnosis. So if you are ill and you go see a doctor and the doctor looks at you and says, well, you have some skin fungus, and he gives you some fungicide, but in actual fact, you've got a skin cancer, that's the wrong solution. It's the same here. With a wrong diagnosis, we create wrong solutions. And I want to say often, the cure is worse than the disease, sad to say. But there is a solution, which is what I've presented in some of the earlier videos. Top economists agree. Has this been tried in the real world? Yes, it has. It's been tried in the US, in Canada, in New Zealand, slightly different. We have different legal systems, etc. All right. Top economists, you say, well, yeah, who? Well, senior economists from the President's Council of Economic Advisors, International Monetary Fund, central bank researchers. It's not the only one. I'm not the only one who's saying there is a real solution of creating money based on value and not on debt. President Lincoln did this. This is how we paid for the Civil War. This is how we built the Transcontinental Railway. So we built hospitals and schools 150 years ago. It worked then. It did not create inflation, all right? Milton Friedman spends pages and pages in analysis on that, saying, ladies and gentlemen, some of the issues that came out economically at that time were not caused by what we then called US notes. We do have answers. Money based on value, not on debt. Thank you. I hope this convoluted analysis of how our political system works and why we are angry is something that will give you something to think about. Because in the past, same with the Great Depression, we had Irving Fisher, who many consider to be the greatest economist the U.S. has ever had. I'm sorry, we didn't create him. He advocated exactly what I'm talking about. Have a look at some of the websites, infrastructurewithoutdebt.org. Have a look at the earlier videos here in this, or go to realmoneyecon.org for a more esoteric explanation. What can you do? You can think about this. You can talk to your presidential candidates, to your senators, to your congressmen, and say to them, ladies and gentlemen, please look at the analysis of where we're at. Please come up with the right solution. Thank you ever so much. I'm Ole Kortsch.